for Cisco Meraki, a cloud networking company. He lives in Berkeley, California, and can be found on Twitter at AlexNovet.
Thanks. Alrighty, there we go. So I love neutral zone stats. I think neutral zone stats are fascinating. This is an area that's really been growing over the past few years thanks to various different tracking efforts. And I really think that they are, in a lot of ways, one of the next big steps coming throughout all of hockey analysis. You know, we have a lot of shot-based metric stuff that's really getting at the what and understanding, who's performing well and who has the on-ice results. And I think, eventually we're going to get microset stuff that's certainly, a big topic of conversation. But before we get to that, I think there's a lot of work to be done. And once we have that, we're still going to need a strong foundation to understand what to look at. And there's plenty that can be done with the manual tracking that already exists. And so, there's a lot of gaps. Even if we just want to answer simple questions about getting the puck from defense to offense and preventing your opponent from doing the same. If we want to answer, who is the best forward in the league at forechecking? We don't have an objective number that we can point to that we say, this is what we think is the best guess at that. We know in our hearts it's Patrice Bergeron, but we don't have, a single number there. If we want to ask who's the best defenseman at transitioning the puck from defense to offense and breaking out of the zone, I, as an Islanders fan, in my heart know that that's Nick Leddy, but I can't prove it. So, that's what I want to try and spend most of my time today working on, is can we take the existing tracking data that we have and put that into a quantifiable metric about how players are able to break out of the zone and forecheck. And here's why that's important. 24% of all 5v5 goals are scored after the team on defense had a chance to get the puck out of the zone. They had possession of the puck, they lost it within their own zone, and the other team was able to recover and score. And if you include opportunities where they were able to just toss the puck out of the zone into the neutral zone, the other team immediately came back in, then it's 43% of all goals. Happened because the defensive team had the puck, had a chance to get it into the offensive zone, but wasn't able to. And so, this is something that's really crucial to look at. So how are we going to do that? Well, we have a bunch of data here thanks to the incredible efforts of American hero Corey Snyder, who has done an enormous amount of tracking. He's covered basically every game of the 2013-2014 season, a bunch of this season, and what I'm going to be focusing on today is about half of all of the games from last season. And he's tracked every zone exit and zone entry from those games. And so I'm using that data, combining it with the NHL play-by-play files, and we can see every event, including transition events, for all of those games. And we have almost 100,000 zone exits to look at in that data set. And now, the traditional way to look at zone exits is you either fail or you succeed. It's 50-50. You either are able to get the puck out of the zone or not. But I like to break into three categories. Really, we have the failures are all the same, whether it's a turnover or an icing, you couldn't get the puck out. Then there's a full transition play, which is you're able to get the next entry and you're advancing on offense. But I think that one should really be distinct from clears, which are you dump the puck out of your zone, but you don't maintain possession of it, and the other team recovers it and brings the puck right back in and gets the next entry. And if you look at the standard exit percentage metric, that's going to count as a success. But I really think that because the other team, the majority of the time, is coming right back in, that shouldn't work. I mean, given enough time and space, you put me in the defensive zone with the puck, I can successfully toss it back into the neutral zone. And as a general rule of thumb, if it's a play that I can successfully make, it should not count as a good hockey play. I will be playing in the game on Sunday. You will see that for yourselves. So I want to take those three different things and see how can we assess based on what a player does whenever he gets the puck. So let's take a player and think about all of their zone exits, every single time that they are in the defensive zone with the puck and the mission of getting it out of the zone. Well, three things can happen. They can either fail, as I said, they can clear it, but have it come right back in, or they can have a fully successful transition. So we can break down what percentage of the time each of those three things happen for that player. And then we can look at the effects. So we can see, well, if they turn it over in their zone, how many shots against do they then allow in that same sequence? If they clear it out and the other team brings it back in, how many shots against are they getting there? And then finally, when they transition it forward, how many shots does their team get because they successfully moved it into the offensive zone? And so if we take all of that together, we can combine it into what I'm calling the zone exit score, which is essentially a measure of, given this player having the puck and starting a zone exit, about what are the expected shots we would expect to see. If it's a positive number, we expect that their team will now be getting a shot. If it's a negative number, we expect that the other team is more likely to get a shot. And we can see overall, how are they pushing play? So here's what that number looks like for the entire league. About a quarter of the time, each player fouls, but a third of the time they clear the puck out of the zone, and then 44% of the time, the rest, there's a complete successful transition. And a couple of things to note about this. So when I looked at how many shots against, and this is the most complicated portion of my code, if there's a mistake, it's in those 0.5 numbers, which is essentially looking at those shots against. And it looks like whether you lose the puck in your own zone, or you lose the puck because you just dumped it out and they brought it back in, either time, the other team is going to get, on average, about half the shot. And as a quick side note, everything I say shot here is Corsi, because if you want shots on goal, you should say shots on goal. The other thing interesting here to note is that the overall league average score is just about 0. And there's no natural reason for this to happen, but I find it super interesting. Because basically what that's saying is, on one hand, you have possession of the puck, and that's great. On the other hand, you're in your own zone, and that's bad. And those things combine and just about cancel each other out in terms of who's going to get the next shots. And so that's the battle, really, that we're seeing throughout that. And the average time you see a player with the puck in their zone, it's really a 50-50 toss-up in terms of what's going to happen next. So, if we're looking at an individual player, we have to take those different numbers that I put up there for the league and say, what are their numbers? But we also have to figure out, exactly how much of this is their responsibility. If a bunch of this is just random, then it's not fair to put that into that player's specific performance. So here are all of the different correlation coefficients for each of those. Because there's so many of them, I tried to do Bonferroni correction. I'm not a full statistician, so if you are a statistician, feel free to look at this and come up with something better. If you're not a statistician but still want to improve it, feel free to fund my master's degree. I'm very open to this. And what we see here is essentially that there's 4 different stats that matter. You can't see it super well here, but the failure, clear, and transition percentage, what happens next, those are all pretty much in a player's control, whether they're a forward or a defenseman. And also, how many shots they get on the transition also has a player impact. And where they don't have an impact is the Corsi against in either case. So essentially, once the player loses control of the puck, then it's pretty much out of their hands, and we can pretty much just say it's the league average situation. And there could be a case there's some shot quality things there, maybe some players give up particularly dangerous shots against, but I'm not going super into detail on all of that. We're essentially just saying that we know that the top 3 and the bottom 1, those are impacted by the specific player. The latter one probably because of possession. If you can carry the puck out of the zone, if you can carry the puck into the next zone, you're going to have more of the shot impact, and so it's probably coming through that, but there's really a bunch of different ways. So when we're calculating how this is going to work for each player, we're going to fill in that player's stat for those top 3 and the bottom 1, and then for the 2 in the middle, we're just going to say league average. Anything else is pretty much just luck. And of course, there's also a team effect. So I have not done a ton in figuring out exactly what's the player versus the team system, because certainly the structure that the team's prepared for how to break out, how to forecheck, has a big impact. But as just a quick look, I took the 4 teams where we have pretty much their entire season tracked, and you can definitely see that, so the x-axis is the individual player, how well they're exiting the zone. The y-axis is the on-ice breakout score, which is essentially, when they're on the ice, they're not the one having the puck, so it's the same thing as, individual Corsi attempts versus your on-ice Corsi. And what we see is that pretty much all of the players from Arizona are not doing particularly well. Same thing for the Rangers. Whereas for a team like Columbus, they have much higher scores across the board. And Philadelphia is pretty much all over the map. And so we don't have a definitive, here's exactly how much is about the team, here's how much is about the player, but we can definitely expect that there's some version between the two, that those are interacting, and the systems matter, and also the player's ability matters. And even if we know that the team structure is important, we also can look within the team itself and see how are things doing there. So here we have each player on the Winnipeg Jets looking at how many exits they personally have each game. And then the y-axis is how well they're doing by their zone exit score on here. And we see, unsurprisingly, it's a couple of their key defensemen are doing most of the zone exits. So we have Tyler Myers, Jacob Trouba, Dustin Buckland are doing the vast majority of that. And at least surprising to me is that Buckland was actually not quite as good as the other two. And then you see a lot of the forwards, who are also doing this, and you can get a sense of, who's taking that responsibility and doing more of that, and also who's having success. And you do generally see a bit of this relationship where the players doing it less often tend to have more success, which is probably just a thing of opportunity. They're only going to try and break it out if they have a good chance to do so, and that's going to increase their success. So there's definitely more to dig into and parse out. Or you're Chris Thorburn, and you know you're bad at it, you don't try it, when you try it, it goes poorly. We can also see a team that struggled with it more, so a team like Arizona. So you can't see the axes here particularly well, but now everything's basically shifted down, so almost all players but the top couple are in the negatives. And they rely incredibly heavily on Ekman Larson and Alex Goligoski to do all of the zone exits. And it's probably not their fault that their performance is in the negatives. It's a combination of how their team is doing and the amount of time that they're expected to do this. But we can still look at this for a team and understand how is that team breaking out of the zone. And then finally, we can look at individual players, because everybody loves individual players. So this is forwards and defensemen looking at 3 different versions of this stat. So the first one is that individual zone exit score. It's when they have the puck on their stick, how well do things go? Then the green one is the on-ice version. So when they're on the ice and trying to break out of the zone, how well does their team do? And then the third one's the reverse. It's the forecheck score. So it's how does their opponents do when they're breaking out of the zone? And there's definitely some results here that make sense. There's definitely some results here that are pretty odd. I suspect, if you're seeing one up there and say, that doesn't make any sense. And I would say, I agree. Anthony DeAngelo and Brian Boyle being up there does not make very much sense. But it's likely a combination of a couple of factors, one of which is being sample size. There's plenty of teams here where we only have 20 or 30 games tracked. And the second one being quality of teammates issue as well. So there's a lot more to dig in there, but there's some interesting signs. On the forwards, the top 3 forwards at breaking out of the zone are the 3M line in Calgary. So when you're trying to understand, that line is amazing, how are they doing it? You can see a huge portion of it is that they are incredibly good as a unit of breaking out of their defensive zone. You can also see this does pass the Patrice Bergeron test. He is in fact 3rd in the league at the forecheck score. And I was right, Nick Leddy was #1 in zone exits. So we can get a sense here of who those players are and start digging into that. And so now, I want to switch over and use this format to talk about something a little bit different. So, I just have a quick slide to sort of provide just a brief visual interlude between the 2 different topics I'll be discussing, sort of a palate cleanser.
Shame.
Got roughly half the room. That's better than I thought. So we can also use this format not to just look at individual players, but also to look at other types of zone exit and breakout plays and forecheck plays to get a better sense of how they're going to go. And one way to do that is the long-standing discussion about exiting and entering the zone with possession versus without possession. And when I last presented at Rochester, I showed this slide that I thought was very smart, showing that essentially, when you're exiting out of the zone, if you carry or pass the puck out of your defensive zone, you are almost definitely going to then get an entry into the next zone. Whereas if you dump out the puck, you have only just a 1 in 5 chance, and the odds are the other team is going to recover the puck and come back in. And I thought this was great, and it proved it. You should be carrying the puck out of the zone all the time. I still think that's decently true, but there is a bunch that this is missing. The biggest part of that being we don't have a way to measure failures in here. that, if this is true, once they get the carry out or the dump out, but the dump out always gets out of the zone, whereas a carry out is a 50-50, sometimes you do it, sometimes you turn it over in your own zone, we don't have the stats to account for that in this system. So maybe we need to be factoring that in when we're making that judgment. So we can take the same formula that I've been using and use it, instead of looking at individual players, look at specifically whether they're exiting the zone with possession or exiting the zone without possession. And here I'm just grouping carrying out or passing it out as the same possession play. And so now we're not looking at what happens when a specific player does it. We can look at what happens when it's specifically an exit with control or an exit uncontrolled. The problem is we still don't have that failure percentage. We can't tell, and go into the player's head and say, hey, that time you turned it over in the defensive zone, were you going to try and carry it out, or were you just going to throw it out? What was your plan there? It didn't work out. So we don't have that variable in here, but we can fill out the rest. And here's what that looks like. So for now, I'm just putting an x and a y into the two different failure equations, because we don't know what it is. But we know, that of the rest of them, so 1 minus x, the rest of the time when they do get it out, we know what percentage it's going to be a clear, what percentage of the time it's going to be a transition, and what are the shots for and against as a result. And there's a little bit of variation there. That's probably mostly randomness, but I'm not going to worry about it too much. So now what we can do, this doesn't answer the question. We still don't have the x and the y. But through the magic of algebra, we can get closer. So the top line here are just those two equations you saw beforehand, where it's the value of carrying the puck out and the value of dumping the puck out. And now we're going to set them equal, which is essentially saying we're going to imagine a world in which right now every decision is being made perfectly. So right now the value of dumping the puck out, as seen in the league, is identical to the value of carrying it out. They're making the right decision essentially most of the time, because we don't have this imbalance where you would say, oh, right now on the margin you ought to be doing one or the other more often than you are. And then we just solve straight down for that. So now we can see, in a world in which those two are equal, what should the x variable and the y variable be? And then from there we can graph it and see, how likely is that to be? So right now we can all, take a minute, think and plug in your head your own x and y variable. So think, what do you think when somebody tries to carry the puck out of the zone? What percentage of the time do you think they mess up and turn it over? And then if they just try and dump the puck out of the zone, what percentage of the time do you think that they're going to turn it over? And that's your x and y variable. So with that in your head, here's what that line on the last slide actually looks like. So if your x and y variable are in the bottom right, you think that the chance of failing when you're carrying the puck out is like more than 75, more than 80% of the time. And the chance of losing it when you have an uncontrolled exit is like less than 50% of the time. Then you're in this bottom right world where you should actually ignore the typo and say to carry or pass it out less. But most of the time, and I think most people are going to find that they're in the top left there, which is essentially we should definitely be carrying or passing the puck out of the zone more often. We don't have the perfect numbers. We don't know exactly what reality is, but it seems incredibly unlikely to me that you lose the puck when you're carrying it out 3/4 of the time or more, but you almost never dump it out. In all likelihood, it's much lower down, it's towards the left side of the graph, and so that means that, not every time, but certainly the marginal one, the one where it's like 50-50 right now, and teams are leaning towards dumping the puck out, it seems to be worthwhile to be carrying the puck out of the zone more often in those situations. So there's plenty more to be done for this. Obviously, more data would always be nice, especially for something like this, where we still have pretty limited samples for individual teams, individual players, really only one season of fleshed out data. So there's a ton more we can do there. There's also different variations of this that can be done. So looking at off-ice things, coming up with better relative to team metrics, that would all be good there. And then using that to get a better sense of the team influence. We can also dig into this because now we have a look at all of the different factors going into breakout play for individual players. So you can imagine, take a hero chart or what a bunch of the great work that CJ's been doing to visualize neutral zone stats. You can add in a bunch of that to get the full picture of what's happening when a certain player is on the ice in their neutral zone performance. And then, moving forward, big picture, there's a lot more we can do to really model better information about this. I have not talked at all about the location of the puck when they're starting the zone exit. or whether or not the player is being pressured by forecheckers when they're trying to get the puck out of the zone. And those undoubtedly have a big influence. A lot of the times the score here has been higher for forwards than for defensemen, just because their zone exits start closer to the blue line anyway. And so, getting that information, whether it's just factoring in whether or not they were pressured, but ideally, in the future we'll be able to build out an even fuller model to really assess, what is the likelihood rather than just looking at success or not. And the last thing that we can do is all of you can come help with this. This data is available thanks to all the work that Corey Snyder does. So you can get access to this. There's tons to be done. It's really an underutilized resource. So feel free to dig into it. I've also set up this hashtag, some of you may have seen, hashtag HockeyHelper. That's for anybody looking to get into hockey analytics, whether it's just learning more things to read or doing things yourself or figuring out how to code. Feel free to use that hashtag on any tweet that you send out. And me and various other people from HockeyGraphs, from elsewhere, are going to be watching that, trying to help out. So thanks. That wraps up for me. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to come find me, or I'm on email or Twitter. If you thought it was great, you just want to tell people how great it was, feel free to shoot an email to analytics@eagles.nfl.com. I'm sure they'll be interested. I will have stuff on GitHub shortly. I just need to clean that up and get a sample of Corey's data that I can share. And as always, thank you for Corey for doing most of the work and putting in most of the time for this talk. Thanks.
We have time for about 3 questions.
So, do you account for the fact that there are a lot of dumpings just to make the shift, to make the change on the ice? Because I think, I don't know, maybe 40% of dumps are just to get the players off the ice.
Yeah, so for zone entries, those are excluded. If it's just clearly a dump and change and there's no attempt to recover the puck in the offensive zone, those are not included here. If it's in a zone exit and it's just they're tossing the puck out and then trying to sneak off a couple of players for a change, that's included here because that's more, they're still playing defense and they might be able to get some people out. And that's a case where maybe that clear does turn out to be a little bit better than a zone exit failure. But we don't see a ton in there, and we are including those as situations worth noting.
So you mentioned zone entry and how some of them might be more effective and whatnot. Is there any way to see how countermeasures are being used? So, for example, if I know you're carrying it out, I would specifically position my players for that.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a bunch to be done on the system side and in responding to what's being done. In terms of the basics, so for zone entries, do you have entry defense? So at least seeing which is the defenseman being paired up and how are they doing things. But I definitely think there's a lot more that can be done. It's tough with the data we have available to really get a sense of what the system being used and who's covering who and what that is. But you can definitely see some corrections. If in my perfect world people are playing with possession more often, the teams opposing that are definitely going to respond in some way and play against that. And so we're always going to have sort of that cat and mouse game of moving things around. And it definitely would be worthwhile to figure out how can we better assess what's going on there. For now, we pretty much just have that high level. So if we take the transition score and look at what I'm calling the forecheck score, so how good are you at stopping the other side, at least we can get a rough sense of how a team or how a player is doing on that side.
Time for one more.
Just back to that first question, especially for the clearing, sort of potentially controlling that directly, call it desperation clear, and everything, the choice of when they tend to clear versus kind of stay it out, is that it's actually a indication of how tired they are?
It potentially could be. I think it would be tough. It would be sort of like this, you'd have to make a subjective call on what are they trying to do there, but I think it would be doable, and definitely I think there's a lot of different things you could look at. It could be worthwhile to sort of assess, what is going on in that dump out, whether you have just players chasing it after it, you could have some to control there. I think it would be worthwhile. It's not something that we have readily available to run that analysis right now.
Just use the shift length of the team. Either pin it to whatever you think is reasonable, short, medium, long buttons, or just capture the number of seconds directly.
Yeah, I think that would potentially work. That's probably the best option there, was to look at shift length, look at time since the zone entry against might help out with that, and then it's just a matter of figuring out how to do it, but that definitely would help.